Hi, I'm professional wildlife photographer Miguel. This video is all about beginners wildlife photography. Today I've picked out 5 tips which I think are really going to help you if you're just getting started. Number 1 is autofocus mode. So you're probably already using autofocus on your camera. I would suggest you use autofocus the majority of the time when shooting wildlife. Manual focus can actually be useful on a few occasions. The important thing to know is which autofocus mode you've got set in the camera. So you've probably got 2 different options. You'll have one focus mode which is single shot on Canon and maybe AFS on other cameras. So this one basically where you focus the camera and the focus locks and then it will take the picture. And then your other one, which is a continuous focus mode. On the Canon cameras this is servo, on other cameras such as Nikon it'll be AFC. And this is a continuous focus, so as long as you keep the focus engaged it's going to follow the subject around, so you're moving birds, animals for example. So make sure that you know which focus you've got set on your camera. I'm not going to go into it too much in depth in this video, but just be aware that you've got those 2 focus options and it's going to make a difference to your pictures as to which one you're using. Number 2 is focus points. So I'd say this is probably as important as the first one. When I work with clients, a lot of the time they have all the focus points lit up. Essentially the whole viewfinder is focusing on the subject. The problem with that is that you don't know exactly where the camera is focusing. So you want to know where you are focusing as accurately as possible. So you'll have a center focus point and then you may have a group of focus points around that, and what I'd suggest is that you try and use one focus point or a small group if possible. But if you use all the focus points together then you're not really being very accurate in where you're focusing, and it's really important to be as specific as you can when you're photographing wildlife. So number 3 is to use Aperture Priority, and this I think is a great setting for beginners. What I would say further down the road when you're getting more into wildlife photography, I'd really encourage you to try and use manual exposure and understand that as best you can. But in the beginning I think Aperture Priority is a really good setting to use. I use it a lot of the time when I'm working with beginners. So you might have other settings such as shutter priority, manual, and then you may have these other options for specific situations like portraits, landscape, macro, etc. But the Aperture Priority AV, the reason that this is so good I think is because if you set a wide aperture, so if you set f5.6 for example on Aperture Priority setting, the camera is always going to pick the fastest shutter speed that it can do given the situation of the lighting and the ISO that you're using. So it's good for that reason, because you get a fast shutter speed which is really useful in not only stopping the subject movement but also in stopping some camera shake, and both those things are going to help you to get sharp images. The other advantage of the wide aperture is that in most wildlife images you want the background to be out of focus and the bird to stand out nicely against it, so your wide aperture is going to do that. So Aperture Priority with a wide aperture kind of does those 2 different things, and I think it's a really good setting for beginners. So that kind of leads me on to number 4, which is dealing with underexposure. So a lot of the time, very common problem when you're shooting birds on branches against the sky or birds in flight against the sky for example, you'll come out with underexposed images. The images are too dark. So the best way to deal with that, again if you're using Aperture Priority setting, the best way to manage that is to either you may have a dial which does this on the back of the camera, or you'll have a plus minus button. And what you want to do is press that plus minus button down, and then there'll be some kind of dial either on the back or the top of the camera, and you just want to go in the plus direction. So if you move that dial to the plus direction, what you're basically doing is increasing the exposure, making it brighter, and you're overriding the underexposure that the camera wants to do. So it takes a bit of trial and error and experience as to how much, but if you're photographing a bird against a cloudy sky for example, then maybe try around +1, and see how you go with that. Number 5 is continuous shooting. So when you're photographing wildlife, you don't just want to be taking one shot at a time on a single frame setting. You want to have it on continuous shooting or rapid fire. This is going to vary from camera to camera how fast it can be, but I would advise that you make sure you know where that setting is to change the frame rate. So take it off single frame and put it on a continuous setting. And the reason for that is it's not necessary all the time to take loads of pictures and be firing away like a machine gun, but what it does, it increases your chances of two things. One, it increases your chance of a pin sharp image, because wildlife is generally moving around. Even if a bird's sat on a perch, it's still going to be moving its head around and that kind of thing. So the more pictures you take, the more likely it is that one of those images, the bird was slightly stiller and it'll be pin sharp. And the other reason is just that it's the kind of pose that you might get. So the more pictures you take, especially if something's moving, the more chance you've got of getting that one pose that is more pleasing to the eye. So it will depend from camera to camera. This Canon 1DX does 12 frames a second, which is just fantastic. What I probably would say is ideally you want a frame rate of at least 5 frames a second, which will make your life a bit easier. And number 6, yeah, I know I said there was only 5 tips in this video, but number 6 is such an important one, it's got to be included in this. And that is, please put the welfare of your subject first before anything else. So if you're new to wildlife photography, you know, this may not be as familiar with you, but there's a lot of situations where subjects are disturbed more than they need to be. So what I'd say is, we all have instinct. It's not that difficult sometimes to tell that an animal or a bird is uncomfortable. For example, if you know where there's a nest and you've got your camera ready to photograph a bird, if that bird's coming back flying around with food and it keeps hopping around from branch to branch almost in a circle but not going to the nest, then you know that you're disturbing that bird, and in that case you need to back off a bit, maybe back off to a point where you view with binoculars to make sure that the bird is going to the nest. Nothing you should do should interfere with the natural behaviour of the subject. If you love nature, as you should do because you've got into wildlife photography, then I'd really urge you to learn as much as you can about the subjects you're going to be photographing. Not only is that going to help you reduce disturbance and stress to the subject, but it's also going to help you photography, because the more time you spend watching a wild bird or animal, the more you're going to learn about its habits, the more you're going to understand what it's going to do next, and that's going to help your photography probably more than anything else I could teach you. So please do take that seriously and always put the welfare of the subject first. So I really do hope that those tips have helped you out if you're a beginner and you're just getting started in wildlife photography. If you'd like to learn with me on a one-to-one basis or in a small group workshop, then do check out the link on the screen, and I'll also put a link in the description box as well. So I've worked with literally hundreds of clients over the past few years, so if you're interested, please feel free to ask me any questions about those. If you haven't subscribed, please do click on the subscribe button and also the bell icon, which will give you notifications of new videos. And if you feel like sharing the video, that's always good, because any shares on social media makes a massive difference to this channel and is greatly appreciated. So thanks again for watching the tutorial, and I will see you somewhere soon.